Welcome everyone to a very special presentation. To commemorate Kwibuka, the 27th annual commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, Mr. Bavon Kirenga will share with you this experience during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Bavon was only 9 years old when he watched his parents, brothers, and a sister murdered by the Hutu militia. His story of survival is one of strength and resilience and an inspiration to us all. This is a very emotional and important testimonial that is being shared with students in high schools across Canada. And thanks to online platforms, is now possible when we cannot go in person to schools. Thank you, Bavon, for sharing this incredible personal story with us. We gratefully also acknowledge Moses Gasharabaki and the International Rwanda Youth for Development for their generous sponsorship of this evening. Bavon, I am proud to say, is a member of the Foundation for Genocide Education School Presentation Program. This team includes survivors of UN-recognized genocides, as well as descendants of survivors. We go in person and now online to high schools and to adult audiences to relay the stories of survivors of genocides, as we all know that history is best passed on by storytelling. The mission of the Foundation for Genocide Education is to ensure that the history of genocide is taught in every single high school in Canada and the United States. We are accomplishing this in many ways, with the introduction of a Quebec government guide for teachers on genocide in the fall that will be used in every high school in the province, with our school presentation program, and also with advocacy programs to stop online hate and to create awareness about present-day genocides in Myanmar and China. As April is Genocide Awareness Month, the Foundation for Genocide Education has asked a few of our school presenters to share their stories with the general public so that the memory of those who perished during the Holocaust and the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi in Rwanda is kept alive, and the lessons these stories teach about the dangers of unchecked hate continue to be taught. I know you'll be touched by Bavon's presentation, as I was when I first heard it and every single time that I listened to it. We will be having a question and answer period after the presentation. The questions could be asked in French or English. Please send in your question via the chat box at the bottom of your screen. I present to you Bavon Kirenga.
Thank you, Heidi. So my name is Bavon Kirenga, and I'm a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. And for those who don't know, Rwanda is a small country in the continent of Africa. And I am here today to share my story of how we went in 1994 from a family of 9 to a family of 4. And how, in the space of 90 days, my world turned upside down. And I was 9 years old at the time. The genocide in Rwanda was one of the most violent events in human history. In 3 months, close to 1 million people died. And I'm here to tell you about my experiences, what I went through, what I witnessed, how I survived, and to honor those who died. I hope that my story can teach you about the consequences of intolerance and ignorance, and how quickly these behaviors can lead to mass killings when neighbors are led to kill fellow neighbors and entire communities are destroyed. Though the genocide took place in 1994, the killings of the Tutsis by the Hutus started in 1959. These two ethnic groups had previously lived for centuries in Rwanda in close proximity. And according to stereotypes, there were differences in physical appearances between the Hutus and the Tutsis, with the Tutsi generally having taller and slender bodies, and the Hutus being shorter and more robust. But beyond the physique, we both share the same language, the same religion, and many aspects of our culture. During the colonial period, when European countries ruled over Africa, the Belgians gave special treatment to the Tutsis because of their more European-like appearance. The Belgians had a system of racial classification where Europeans were at the top and Africans at the bottom of society. And when Rwanda became independent in 1962, the Hutu gained access to power, meaning the Tutsis, a minority in Rwanda, lost their favorite position. And in the 1960s, the differences between the Hutus and the Tutsis started to become more noticed and divisive. To distinguish who was Hutu and who was Tutsi, noses and skulls were measured. People's ethnicity were clearly marked on identity cards. And out of fear of what was to come, around 300,000 people, Tutsi, fled Rwanda, including my parents, to neighboring countries such as Uganda and Burundi. However, many Hutus and Tutsis continued to live as neighbors, and particularly in the rural area. And in the capital of Kigali, like elsewhere, the two ethnic groups continued to work side by side. My parents, who were both Tutsi refugees, met and got married in Uganda. And after my father got a job with an European company named DHL, they returned to Rwanda because they felt it would be safe for them and their 3 young children. My 4 other siblings and I were born in Rwanda soon after. For my aunts and uncles living in Burundi as exiles, they saw and talked about Rwanda as being a dreamland and a place they always wish to come back to. And in the 1990s, tensions between the Hutu and the Tutsi started to degenerate, with more Hutus killing Tutsis. My mother wanted us to leave, but my father chose for us to stay because he was convinced that things will pass over. Here you will see a video of a typical militia training that was going on at the time. And in schools, a division was created between the Hutu and the Tutsi children. I remember as a child, my teacher would ask my classmates to stand up if they were Hutus. And then they sat down and he would ask the Tutsis to stand up. And when that happened, my younger brother and I were often the only ones standing. And that is why sometimes I will even stand up with the Hutus because I didn't want to feel left out. In 1994, the UN demanded the Hutus and the Tutsis to share political power in the country so the violence would stop. For the extremist Hutu political elite, this was an unforgivable betrayal. And rather than to lose their hold on power, they decided to set in motion a plan with the help of the military to exterminate all the Tutsis. The genocide started on the night of April 6th, in 1994, when the Hutus president's plane was shot down. There had been warnings on the radio days before that something big was going to happen. Radio commentators had announced that soon the Hutu would be able to feast on the Tutsis like vultures. But nobody could predict the horrific events that were to follow.
Autour de Pâques et dans les jours qui suivent, quelque chose va se passer à Kigali. Ce sera probablement autour du 7 avril. Alors vous entendrez le bruit des balles, vous entendrez exploser des grenades. J'espère que les forces armées rwandaises sont prêtes, parce que les vautours pourront se régaler.
The crashing of the plane gave the Hutu extremists the excuse they needed to start killing the Tutsis, accusing them of assassinating the president. The calls to kill got so loud that they drowned everything else. As a child, I remember playing outside and seeing the plane being shot. I happened to be staying over at a family friend's house with my siblings. My parents were 2 doors down, and they had asked friends to babysit us so that they could have a weekend alone. I, like the other kids around me, thought that we had just seen fireworks. So I was excited, so I rushed inside to tell the people in the house what I had seen. They were listening to the radio, and the adults in the room had a look on their faces that seemed like they were about to die. And it is an image I will never forget. I knew that something terrible was going to happen, and almost immediately after, we started to hear gunshots. And we knew that people were being killed all around us. The next morning, roadblocks made by the military appeared all over the street. Here is an example of what a roadblock looked like. There was no way of getting out. It was impossible to escape. And remember, your ethnic group was reading on your ID card. The Hutu-run military forces had marked the houses and the neighborhood and carried lists of names of people to round up and kill. They were already searching for my father, and we had a servant who happened to be Hutu and was loyal to my family, so he was allowed to walk freely in the street. So he would bring news from my parents, and he told us that they had been forced to give up all their money and jewelry away to soldiers, but luckily they were still alive. On April 12th, 6 days after the genocide started, my parents risked their lives to cross over during the night to the house my siblings and I were in. We were now around 20 people hiding in that house. The next morning, a Hutu soldier found us. He was accompanied by the Hutu civilians who decided to take part in the killings against us. And we had neighbors who lived between my parents' house and my parents' friend's house. And it is through the garden of this house that my parents went to join us. I learned much later that it was these neighbors who reported us to the Hutu soldiers. Many of these Hutus had been employed by my father in the past and knew him personally. So they would spit on him and insult him, laughing that he used to be a big boss, but now was about to die. And my father was very sick and unable to respond. He was a diabetic and he had gone several days without his medicine. I remember the soldier got a call and he told us that he would be back in 15 minutes. And if you could imagine, in those 15 minutes, we were to decide how we wanted to die. Whether by a machete, a grenade, or a gun. When he left, the adults started to argue, and as to which would be less painful. So one person said that a grenade would be the quickest way to die. But another person said that you might survive the explosion and be forced to experience an even slower and more painful death. While they were debating, others were crying on the floor. My mother, who was very religious, was praying out loud on her knees, And at the time, I wasn't even afraid because everything seemed so surreal to me. When the soldier came back, he asked what we had decided on. So the adults responded, guns. They placed us in a straight line and the shooting started. One by one, my family members and our neighbors fell. I sadly remember my older brother getting shot and seeing him crumple to the ground. I thought to myself, is this how my life will end? Am I really about to die here and like this? I wonder what a bullet would feel like, whether I would feel any pain or if angels will appear once I crossed over into heaven. And while the soldier was reloading his gun, I managed to get out of line and run towards an open gutter. But I didn't make it very far before they started shooting at me. I soon fell to the ground, and when I opened my eyes, I felt numbed and couldn't sense where I had been shot. I was losing and regaining consciousness, and it took me a few minutes before I realized that a bullet went through my leg. Not far away, I could see Mado, my 4-year-old sister, silent and sucking on her thumb, with a hole in her arm where a bullet went through. And all around, bloodied people were lying on the ground. I knew that my older brother Ivan, my older sister Anita, and my parents had been killed. Out of the 20 people in that house, only 4 of us were still alive. And everything happened so quickly. It almost didn't feel real. It felt like in the movies, there was ringing in my ears and images were flashing by. I was in a state of shock. More Hutu soldiers came around me and started kicking me, arguing about whether or not to kill me. One of them said that they had no time, that I wouldn't survive anyway, so they left. I only remember afterwards being transported in a van with my 4-year-old sister Mado, my 13-year-old sister Rita, and my 10-year-old brother Kevin. This van was filled with soldiers, government soldiers, and I wondered where they were taking us, thinking surely that this time we would not survive. We arrived at the hospital and they separated the injured into those who were likely to live and those who were likely to die. Kevin was being carried in the direction of the morgue. He had been badly shot in the stomach and wasn't conscious. I want to tell you about the 2 of us, Kevin and I. We were like twins. We would dress the same, play the same sports together, and people will often confuse the 2 of us. We were like a duo and extremely close. I am really saddened to say that it was the last time I will ever see him. I wondered if Mado and I would survive this horrible nightmare. My sister Rita was badly injured, and I feared she wouldn't make it. The hospital was filled with injured Hutu soldiers, and we were the only Tutsi children there. And when the Hutu doctor examined my leg, he said that they would need to amputate it. And I remember insisting that I didn't want to lose my leg, telling him, "Don't cut my leg. I want to keep playing soccer." And for my 9-year-old self, this was so important to me. The doctor just replied, "Keep your leg." I was a Tutsi child, so it didn't matter to him if I died. I found out later in my life why we had been taken to the hospital. So more government soldiers had seen Rita badly injured and taken her with him because she was beautiful and very light-skinned. For some reason, which I will never know, he decided to take me, my brother, and my other sister too. And the Hutu soldier wanted my sister Rita to recover from her bullet wound so that he could have her as his sex slave. We end up spending a total of 3 weeks in the hospital. Every morning, I would get up and check to see if Mado was still alive, because sometimes people would disappear during the night. When I didn't see her, I would start to panic. My older sister was unconscious the whole time. And during my time in the hospital, I would practice moving my leg with my hands because it was still numb from the bullet wound. And I remember wanting to get better so that I could start playing soccer again. There was a woman in the hospital who would bring food to me and my siblings every day. And her name was Marie. And she had risked her own life to sneak into the hospital. She had known my parents, so she cared and looked after Rita, who was still in intensive care. So the Hutu soldier who had brought us to the hospital would come and check up on Rita, asking when she was ready to be taken away. And another soldier had decided that he wanted Rita too. So the two of them would sometimes fight over who would have her, debating whether she was enough for the two. And remember, she was only 13 years old. Marie told him that my sister wasn't well yet, and she invented excuses and asked them to return in 2 weeks. Marie was getting desperate and she was running out of time and excuses. So she managed to locate a man named Haj, who was a Hutu Muslim. And she was told that he might agree to take Rita into hiding. Turns out that this man knew who my father was, and he agreed to return in a few days to take Rita to his home. The day before the soldiers were supposed to come for Rita, Haj took my sister and hid her in his car trunk. And 3 days later, he came back for Mado and I. Haj was well respected in his neighborhood, largely because he had traveled to the Mecca, the holiest site in Islam. And this had earned him prestige and religious authority, which meant that he and his family could not be touched or searched. No one suspected him of hiding Tutsis in his home. And if they found out, he would be killed. I admire his courage. To this day, I still think of him, and I'm so grateful that he saved my siblings and I. And now I will ask all of you to think, would you have risked your life and that of your family to save others? Think about that. And on the radio, we will hear the station Militia broadcast songs celebrating the death of Tutsis. They encourage all the Hutu to exterminate the Tutsis, calling it the final work to exterminate cockroaches. The sound of the radio would not go away.
Muze twishime nshuti yewe imana ntirenganya muze twishime nshuti inkotanyi.
Even I would start to believe the propaganda I heard, becoming scared of the Tutsis, not knowing if they were fully human, despite being one myself. When the killings started, the UN ordered its troops to leave the country. So all the tanks and men in armed gear I had seen in Kigali weeks before were no longer around. Canadian General Romeo Dallaire, who was placed in charge of maintaining the peace in the country by the UN, could do absolutely nothing. Everyone had turned a blind eye, and no one seemed to care about the genocide. No country intervened to stop the madness. When I was staying with Haj, I would sometimes sneak out of the house with his children. We walked the streets of Kigali and we witnessed the ongoing violence. Protected by the other Hutu children around me, I would watch Tutsis plead for their lives and get shot. I would see the mass graves be filled after the massacres. The soldiers would launch grenades in churches where they knew Tutsis were hiding. No place was safe. There were dead bodies all around, and it was no longer traumatizing. I had become immune to the violence. On the radio, we heard that the RPF, the Tutsi-led military group, was heading to Kigali, and Haj, like all the other Hutu in the neighborhood, started to panic. If the Rwandan Patriotic Front entered Kigali, no one knew what would happen. Many Hutu who were guilty of planning and executing the genocide were fleeing to the Congo, a neighboring country whose borders were open. They would leave their machetes in the villages before they fled. But some of the killers simply crossed the border, refusing to give up their arms. And Haj had packed a van so that we, like the rest of his family, could also flee. And some soldiers had held Haj at gunpoint and ordered him to give up his van. There was nowhere we could go. And if I had gone to the Congo as a surviving Tutsi, I would have most likely been killed. On July 15th, the Rwandan Patriotic Front took over the capital of Kigali. Marie, the woman who had taken care of us in the hospital, knew that some of my uncles and cousins were important commanders in the Rwandan Patriotic Front. She managed to find my uncle Toto and told him where we were hiding. My uncle believed that Marie had gone crazy, probably traumatized by all the violence. But he still decided to go and eventually found me, Mado, and Rita. When the genocide ended in July, we were asked by members of my surviving family who we wanted to take care of us going forward. The three of us chose to live with our older sister, Janine, who lived in Quebec because she was like a second mother to us before she moved away. And at the time, she was 20 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Quebec City. And nobody believed that she would be able to take care of us. But somehow she did. We arrived in Canada as refugees in November. We were among the first to arrive. The Rwandan community living in Quebec would ask us what we had seen. They were still trying to understand what had happened in Rwanda. And even though Mado was only 4, she would remember the exact details, such as the types of guns the Hutu were using, the songs the soldiers would sing right before they would shoot. We were first-hand witnesses of the massacres, and in a space of a few months, we had lost our childhood innocence. I went through all of my primary and high school not talking about what had happened in Rwanda. By that time, my 2 sisters, Mado and Mira, who were now 8 and 17, had left to go live with my uncle in France. The girls were having trouble in school, and my uncle was a high school teacher who could help with their difficulties. And even though Janine had taken great care of us, it was decided that it would be for the best. Alone, I kept the events repressed deep inside of me, not knowing how to process the trauma. I felt like rebelling, but didn't know exactly why. I would like to share with you why I have decided to talk about it now. When I was in my late teens, I became more out of control and ended up in bad situations. My past troubles led me to reflect on my life and ask myself how I could do good. And what happened to my family and I was tragic, but yet I didn't want to end up being another casualty. Here you can see a memorial photo of my family, which is at the Kigali Genocide Memorial, a permanent memorial to those who fell victim to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. Talking about my experiences had become a therapy for me, a way to heal from the violence and to remember those I have lost. Thought it may have taken me some time to realize it. My older sister Janine is my hero, and I want to make her proud. And it is with age that I finally realized all the courage it must have taken for Janine to raise us, and especially me. It is also important for me to recognize all that Madu and Rita had accomplished in their lives, like graduating from university and starting a family. While my sister and I will never be able to forget what happened to our family, we did not let it define our future. I want to inform people about racism, about intolerance, and how to prevent future discrimination against groups of people. I also want to help other survivors and children of survivors to make sense of what has happened to us. And remembering and refusing to stay silent will help to carry forward the message, never again. This is the reason why I joined the Foundation for Genocide Education. It is an organization that gives survivors and children of survivors the confidence to share the experiences of genocide to students across the province. Working with the foundation has given me the power to confront my memories, to find the right words to tell my story, and the courage to teach it to others. I'm proud to be part of this organization and to help students recognize the signs leading to genocide. Recognizing these signs will also be taught in the guide on genocide that the foundation is launching with the Ministry of Education in every high school in Quebec in the fall of 2021. The events that took place in Rwanda in 1994 were horrific, but it wasn't the first case of genocide. In the past century, there had been numerous genocides. And even today, across the world, many minority groups are also suffering from targeted acts of violence. Genocide continues to happen. For example, we have Rwanda, Armenia, the Holocaust, Cambodia, Bosnia, Syria, Myanmar, the Uyghurs in China, and the cultural genocide of the First Nations. Hate comes in many forms, and fed by anger can dehumanize people from any culture, ethnic group, or religion. To not repeat the mistakes of the past, we have to be very careful about how we view and treat other groups. In Rwanda, messages of hatred started on the radio, and they only got louder, echoing across the country. Today, we must be vigilant when it comes to what we share on social media and what we listen to online. Do I have a solution for the hate and intolerance in our world? No, I do not. But I think that it would be a good idea to stop dehumanizing the other, whoever that other might be to someone. They may look different, they may act strangely to you, they may have opinions that may make no sense to you. You can disagree and you can argue with them. But you must remember that these people are still your fellow human beings. There is no need to respect their opinion, but there is a need to respect their humanity. We must all work to accept people from other cultures, religions, and sexual orientations. Genocides still happen, and people still watch while others die. Even in Quebec, acts of racism and intolerance are common. Violence against minorities doesn't only happen in countries suffering from civil war or dictatorships. Ignorance is present everywhere. And I hope you all learned from my presentation today about why it is important to look into our own discriminations, how we view and treat others. Thank you all for being here today and for allowing me to tell my story.
Thank you, Bavon, for your wonderful presentation, your dedication, and all the work you have done to prepare this. I know we have learned all something new from this incredible story. I personally find it very, very emotional every time I hear it. For those of you who don't know me, I am Heidi Berger, the president and founder of the Foundation for Genocide Education. Each of our presentation takes many, many months to create. Our foundation team works with the presenter to write the script, edit the video testimonial, prepare background historical information, and rehearse the finished presentation with the presenter. Your financial support is crucial in order for us to continue to create and enable the children of survivors to carry on the legacy of their parents. Please consider a donation towards this important program or a sponsorship of a future presentation by contacting us directly or by going into our website, gened.org. Bavon now will be answering your questions. If you can write them in the chat box in either French or English. Please go ahead.
We have our first question. So what is the message to the genocide against the Tutsi deniers?
I was on mute, sorry. I don't know what would be the message directly to them, because I think they will still do what they do, because it's part of the plan, right? The steps to a genocide, and to deny it afterwards is one of the steps. So there's nothing I could do, I mean, to them directly. But the message will be to other people listening or watching the history going is that as long as there's people still alive or people to tell what happened, because when I will be gone, my kids will be telling my story and so on, is to really inform themselves and don't ever take anything for granted, because to deny, it could be a little small action. You can take off a word. Like I know, for example, we've been fighting for it to be called a genocide against the Tutsis. That's something that we had to fight, even though it was on TV, the whole world watched it happening, right? And you can ask yourself, like, what difference does it make to put or take off one word? But that changed the whole fact, the whole story, right? So that's what I would say, is that to inform yourself, to read, listen to testimonies, so you can always make up your own opinion and don't get fooled by those people who are being negating or trying to change the facts.
We have a related question. Le négationnisme du génocide contre les Tutsis est encore très présent. Pouvez-vous nous parler du danger de ce négationnisme?
Ok, un peu comme en français. un peu comme la dernière question que j'ai répondu en anglais. Moi, je pense que le danger est toujours que ça se répète. Right? Puis, comment les choses se répètent, c'est qu'on oublie comment elles se sont passées. Et j'imagine que les négationnistes, un de leurs buts, c'est ça, c'est de terminer leur plan. Et une des étapes, comme je disais en anglais, il y a des étapes pour un génocide, il y a des ingrédients pour faire un gâteau, par exemple. Donc, ces étapes-là sont très précises, claires et établies. Et une des étapes, c'est le négationnisme après que le génocide se soit passé. Right? Donc, oui, le danger est toujours là. Je pense qu'au Rwanda, ça va beaucoup mieux. Tout le monde essaie d'avancer, mis à part les ethnies, mais ça n'empêche que ça pourrait se répéter demain. Donc, c'est très important de faire attention, de s'informer, de lire, d'écouter les témoignages, hein, parce que je ne suis pas le seul. Hein, il y en a des centaines. Ceux qui sont dans la communauté rwandaise, on en entend des centaines pendant le mois d'avril. Donc, c'est pour ça que c'est très important de faire ces témoignages. C'est très important de faire ce que je fais. C'est très important d'enseigner, exemple, à des jeunes qui sont encore au secondaire, parce que lorsqu'ils vont tomber sur des informations des négationnistes, ils vont pouvoir eux-mêmes savoir faire la part des choses et savoir qu'est-ce qui est un fait ou qu'est-ce qui est un fait changé ou déguisé. Donc, il ne faut jamais oublier que ça peut se répéter. Il faut faire très attention et rester informé, quoi.
Merci. How do you respond to those who hate and seek to destroy others simply because you're different?
Moi, la seule chose que je dirais là, c'est que ce que tu fais à l'autre, parce que cette personne a une certaine différence, mais ça peut être fait à toi parce que toi aussi, tu as une certaine différence envers quelqu'un d'autre. Was the question in English?
How do you respond to those who hate and
Okay.
seek to destroy
So
others?
I was saying that if you hate someone because that person has a certain difference, never forget that you have a certain difference towards, like, for somebody else. So whatever you be doing to that person, it can also happen to you because we all have differences. Even two twins have some sort of difference. So I think it's the best way I can answer it.
Thank you. Another question that's come back several times is, since then, did you go back to Rwanda?
Yes, je pense que Liliane asked that. No, I did not, for various reasons, right? I used to have all type of excuses, right? But now that I can really sit down and I'm more self-aware of the mental luggage ou bagage, je dirais en français, qui vient avec ce que j'ai vécu. For many years, I wasn't ready. I didn't even want to go back unless they let me go back and go in the army, probably for bad intentions. And then another part of my life, I was dealing with the consequences of what happened to me here, right? So I was going through so much stuff, so much type of crazy stories. And when I got out of that, I can say that it's only the last year or the last 2 or 3 years that I really feel that everything is aligned for me to go. And with the COVID and everything, but with my whole family, I would like to go in December, if depending on what's going on with the COVID, right? So to answer the question, I wasn't ready, but now I think I'm ready.
Another question is, what about the justice on your case? Have Gakaka courts considered your case for your hearing and move forward?
A lot of people didn't get a chance to have a trial against the people who killed their families, right? So I'm one of them. And my aunt called Veneranda, who was living in Burundi, she came right after it finished. She tried to find out who did what. And the closest she got was the name of one of the neighbors in the house that were between our house and my parents' friend's house. So the person who reported us to the soldiers where we were hiding, right? And I don't know how you can punish, like how much you can punish such an action, right? So, and she didn't even really found the person. So that is the closest that we got to having a justice, I would say. So now I would say that my justice would be to just prevail and have a good life, have children, have a good family, and can continue to do what I'm doing. So that's my best revenge, the best revenge that I can get. It's for them to know that I'm still alive, my sisters are still alive, and we will all have families and having a good life.
Good. Another question is, where do you find the courage to tell your story, and what would you tell people who are still hesitating to tell the testimonials?
Okay, so my opinion on other people having to tell their stories, I really believe that each and one of them have their way of processing what happened, and they will have their time to do it. So there's nothing that I can tell them that will make them do it. I really want them to take the time to process it. And when they will be ready, they will be ready. Now, where do I find the courage to tell my story? So as I was saying the other day, when you go through something like that, there's a few questions that will haunt you for your life, for your whole life, right? The first one is the why. Why did it happen, right? And that one, you could go close to having an answer if you read books and you research on the country history, right? So I got close to an answer. So I think I understand what played out. But the other question is that why me? Why did I survive out of those 20 bodies? Why me and my 3 sisters, right? And that question, I think I could never find the answer. So instead of being a question, it kind of transformed itself into a gift that, first of all, I survived. I think I'm sane and I'm able to tell my story. So it became like an obligation or a mission where, like, if I'm able to share it and I'm alive and healthy, I have to share it. I have to tell it. The maximum people need to know the facts, because a lot of people knows that the genocide happened in 94 in some country in Africa. But when you have somebody that can really tell you that it happened to me, and I'm also lucky to have a lot of pictures, just a little, so I could put a little emphasis on the pictures. We were very lucky to go back to our house, so everything was burned and had all type of bullets and bombs fell on it, but our family pictures were still intact. So we have like 5 or 6 pictures, albums of our family. So I have a lot of pictures of my family. A lot of people don't even have that chance. They either have a few pictures or not at all. So yeah, to answer that question, there's no way I find courage. I'm not gonna lie, there's no secret to it. So since I have it, I can tell it, I just use it and make it the best that I can.
Thank you. We have another question. Why do you think the UN did not intervene in the genocide?
Okay, that could be debated for years and years, but my own opinion is that yes, the UN was there for the peace, but it's also political, right? As we saw, like Trump, when he came into power, he's saying that like they gave a lot of money to UNs or all those type of organizations, so he decided to stop it or whatever. So it's always attached to politics. And I know that a few events happened before, way before, like right before 94, like in Somalia. I know there was an incident, and when the Marines were involved and they end up losing soldiers, and it became like a fiasco. So when Rwanda came, I think they didn't want to jump in too quick. And a lot of them just looked away. And maybe some of them didn't realize how crazy it was going to be, but a lot of them knew, because like Dallaire would tell you himself that a lot of people came to him with information, like they were buying machetes out of China and all type of information that he could use, but his like the politicians who were not on the ground didn't want him to do anything. So the best way I can answer it is that I think that the UN have a mission, but to never forget that they're always attached to some sort of politics, right?
Another question, we have a few questions about next generation of Rwandans. So how can the next generation best support survivors and ensure that the country progresses past the genocide ideology? And what is your message to the next generation that hasn't lived the genocide or wasn't in Rwanda during the genocide?
Okay, so even though they were not in Rwanda, I work with a lot of youth in my community, and they will tell you that they are still affected some way, right? Either their parents went through it, or whenever they tell anyone that they're from Rwanda, the first question is that, are you Hutu or Tutsi? So they are affected, but they also maybe have a chance to live in the new Rwanda. But one of the things that I really think is important is to talk about the genocide in details and with facts, right? If they really get the facts right, is the best way to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself, right? So I think they have to have they have to help the fight against those who negate, like those who negationists. So how do you say it in English? The negationist.
Denialists.
Denialists. So they have to help fighting the denialists, because the consequences of what they do will be directly into their lives, right? Will be gone. So the best thing I would say would be to seek for the real information, the facts, and then with the facts, instead of making like a separation or use it in a bad way, just trying to make it like use it in a positive way for a better word, right? But it's really important to know the facts and to seek for those facts.
We only have time for 2 more questions. So a question related to what you just said. What skills do you think, what skills do you teach to young people to equip them to separate hate speech and genocide revisionism from the proper facts, especially online?
Oh, wait.
So what skills do you teach to young people so that they can separate between what's hate speech and what's genocide revisionism and what are the proper facts?
Okay, I don't have special skills that I can teach them, right? I'm not a professional teacher, but what I do is really to teach them about the facts, right? To tell them everything that I know, or to direct them towards people maybe in the community that I know that they did a lot of research, give them the most materials that I can give them. I have a group of youth that I'm always communicated with. So whenever I have an information, a movie or documentary, or even something that have to do with my life, I always share it with them and allow them to free speech, like to really ask questions, even those that are even uncomfortable questions, right? And try the best that I could do to answer them. Yeah, it's really what I can say, because I don't have no special skills that I can give them, but it's always like to research, read, and because that's what I did to really understand what happened to me.
Thank you. And the last question we have time for tonight is, penses-tu qu'un jour la communauté rwandaise sera capable de retrouver une unité nationale sans rancune ni haine, juste un désir profond de réconciliation et d'avancement?
Un jour, je vais pas dire que c'est demain, but on avance vers là. Si je regarde il y a 4 ans, il y a 10 ans, il y a 15 ans, ça va vraiment de mieux en mieux. Je pense vraiment que un Hutu ou un Tutsi dans le Rwanda d'aujourd'hui peut vivre au Rwanda et avoir, exemple, une business, puis avoir du succès sans avoir de problème parce qu'il est Hutu ou Tutsi. Ça, c'est genuinely what I really believe. Maintenant, oui, je crois qu'un jour, ça sera possible. Plus, comme j'ai dit, plus on va vraiment retourner dans ce qui s'est passé et en parler clairement, ce qui est vraiment pas facile. Parce qu'il y en a qui sont encore blessés, il y en a qui sont encore fâchés. Il y a beaucoup de facteurs qui font que ce travail-là va être difficile et va prendre du temps. Mais je crois vraiment que oui, on va y arriver parce que avant le colonialisme, somehow on le faisait. Hein, right? On avait moins d'informations, mais on vivait ensemble. So, oui, je crois qu'un jour on va y arriver. Puis je voulais
Thank you.
juste
Go ahead.
vite répondre à la question. Ma jambe, oui, elle a été traitée. J'ai fait du sport au collège et tout. J'en fais toujours beaucoup sans problème. J'ai lu ça dans le chat tout à l'heure.
Thank you, Bavon, very much. And thank you, everybody, for submitting your questions. There are lots of questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. If you'd like, you can submit your questions to our foundation, and Bavon would be more than happy to answer them. Right now, we've invited representatives from organizations representing the Rwandan community in Montreal to give some brief remarks. First, we will hear from Jean-Paul Niliwaya, representing PAJ Rwanda. Thank you, Jean-Paul.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Masha. Thank you, the foundation, for having me tonight. So I want to start by thanking Chico for accepting to share his survival testimony tonight. It takes a lot from any survivor to decide to relive his history in such a public way. It's an act of generosity that we should never ever take for granted. So thank you very much, Chico, for once again tonight gracing us with your presence and delivering your testimony, powerful testimony. And thank you also for all the work you're doing with the youth in the community. You know, you're definitely a living history, a living example that everybody should take, you know, for example. So PAJ Rwanda is a survivor organization based here in Montreal. It was created in 1994 by members of the Rwandan community who were living here in Montreal at that time, who were seeing their families being decimated on television every day. And they decided to get together and put together an organization so that they can help each other, but also to be able to pursue justice. We share the same goals with the Genocide Education Foundation, and we have also been sharing our stories in schools and other institutions all over Quebec for well over 20 years now. We also created a Genocide Research and Documentation Center since 2012. And the center is now, it's housed now at the Center for Oral History and Digital Storytelling at Concordia University. And it has a growing collection of testimonies, survival testimonies, of historical testimonies about what happened in Rwanda, but also books, artifacts about the genocide and stuff. So anyone is welcome to come and use our center for research and to learn. Because we share the same goals as the foundation, we have supported and have collaborated with the foundation since the beginning. Thank you, Heidi, for all the great work you've been doing with everybody who helped you. And the fact that this curriculum is becoming a reality, it's something great that you should be definitely, everybody should thank you for, and we definitely do thank you for it. So great work. And obviously it's not over yet, and you can definitely count on PAJ Rwanda anytime to be able to make this wish a reality that we also share for a long time. And the reason why we do this is because we believe that by shaping young minds, they will grow into responsible adults and will carry on the hope of never again being a reality one day and not just a slogan. And so thank you again, everybody who took the time tonight to come and listen and learn. And we hope that everybody comes out with something new that they learned tonight to help with, you know, especially telling the youth that division and hatred can only lead to bad things, and it's not a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. We will now hear from Elvira Riwa Samanzi, who's president of the Rwandan community abroad.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Jean-Paul, and thank you, Chico, pour ton discours et le rôle que tu joues non seulement pour la commémoration de ceux qu'on a perdus, mais également pour l'éducation et la transmission de la mémoire. La vérité historique, c'est pas facile, c'est un devoir difficile, mais c'est un devoir et l'éducation joue un rôle essentiel dans la prévention d'actes atroces tels que dans la prévention des génocides, mais également un cadre où on peut parler des traumas, parler des violences, les aborder tout en encourageant justement la connaissance, les valeurs et les attitudes susceptibles de contribuer à prévenir les violences à l'encontre de certains groupes et également surtout pour prévenir le négationnisme et le révisionnisme parce que c'est un danger permanent pour la mémoire et pour le vivre ensemble. Et donc, c'est important. Et où commence le négationnisme? Tu l'as mentionné, c'est par les mots. Lorsqu'on refuse d'utiliser les vrais mots, lorsqu'on relativise et qu'on veut appeler le génocide contre les Tutsi le génocide rwandais ou encore une guerre civile. Donc, c'est une forme de violence très dangereuse et une insulte à la mémoire de ceux qu'on a perdus et aussi de ceux et des survivants. Donc, merci à tous et au nom de la diaspora rwandaise de Montréal, on encourage tous et chacun à vous éduquer sur le génocide, sur l'histoire du Rwanda et surtout d'être vigilant au discours négationniste et révisionniste. Merci à tous.
Merci, Elvira. I'd like to thank everybody for attending tonight's presentation. We will be giving more presentations online in the coming months, as well as a new webinar on the genocide in China on May the 10th, featuring Erwin Kotler and the former Canadian ambassador to China, David Mulroney. I encourage you all to stay tuned for more information in the coming weeks. Thank you again, Bavon. Good night to all.